so I'm here to talk about communicating and documenting architectural decisions, something that, as we all know, is hard. It's got the word documenting in it, so no one likes to do it. This is a little bit about me. She talked about me. I've been doing this for a long time. I spent 15 years at the Container Store helping them build up all of their systems. So a lot of the experience I'm going to talk about here is going to be based on what we did there and how we built up our teams and how we communicated and built practices that helped everyone understand what we're doing. So we do live in interesting times, right? The world has changed. You look at what's happened in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years, in the last 15 years about how we build systems, and everything's changed, right? We've got agile practitioners telling us how we should build things and that we should have decision-making pushed down to the teams. We should let architectures emerge from the ground and magically show up, and everything's going to work together, and it's all going to be great. Right? You should delegate those responsibilities to the last responsible moment, right? But we still have jobs to do as technology leads, right? We have to maintain the health and welfare of our system. Liz talked earlier about understanding and dealing with production problems, right? Like, how do you do that if you've got 15 different teams building things 15 different ways with no guardrails around how they make their decisions? So I've struggled with this a lot, and I've really tried to figure out how do you balance those two things, right? How do you balance giving people freedom to make decisions and to choose tools that work best for the way they do work versus how do you then make sure that those systems are all maintainable and observable as you go into it? So I'm going to start with an example, something we ran into at the Container Store. So we had a team, right? And so we were all about letting teams kind of make their decisions. This was very early on in the process. This is probably 8 years ago. And they're like, we want to use Mongo. We're like, cool, that sounds awesome, right? So, they schemaless, they did their development, it's super fast, they got everything done, and it's great. And they're like, cool, let's go to the ops guys and get this doing. They're like, you did what? Like, we use Oracle here. What are you doing with this Mongo thing? And so that was a failure that this is pre-DevOps days and pre-understanding how you do these things. But again, they made this decision. They built this awesome piece of software, and operations had no ability to support it. You had to run Mongo at least in a 3-node cluster. They hadn't provisioned anything. And this isn't a tale about DevOps, but it's a tale about communication, right? There was no communication, no standards, so the team did what they wanted with no ability to support it. So I'm going to talk about 3 techniques that we kind of settled on. We didn't invent any of these in particular, but just I'm going to talk about the ways we use them, and hopefully that'll be useful for some of you as you go through your journeys at your companies. So the first one is lightweight architectural decision records. The second one is enterprise architecture guilds, and the third one is building reference implementations. So I'll start with lightweight architectural decision records. So this is something that everyone asks themselves, right? What in the crap are we thinking, right? Now, we make decisions all the time, right? All of us do, and we care about them, right? This isn't saying that you made a bad decision, because everyone cares about that decision. Everyone's on whiteboards, and there are pros and cons, and there's arguments, and there's all kinds of great discussion around this stuff, right? But what we aren't good at is socializing those decisions, right? Socializing just means understanding that the group, right, we're a social group, that those decisions are socialized and talked about even amongst the team or amongst the organization at large, right? Whoever participated in those conversations, they understand why you made the decision, but no one else does. And we're not good at recording them, right? Like, no one is particularly good at documentation, right? So one of the things that you can do is try to make that as easy as possible, right? As developers, we're lazy. We want to do as little work as possible and automate as much as we can, right? So what you need to do is understand not only what the decision is, right? You can see what the decision is. You can look in the code base and see they decided to use React, or they decided to use Angular, or whatever. So you can see what the architectural decisions are, but what you can't see is the whys and the context about what led you to that decision. So architectural decision records, Michael Nygaard is an author and speaker. He came up with this idea about documenting your decisions in a lightweight way. and doing it along with the code, right? So it's a way to document, and it's a place to put the documentation. There's a special case for decisions that span across multiple projects that wouldn't make sense to put in a particular code base. So I'll talk about those at the end of this. So all too often, the decisions we make aren't well documented. And if they are, they're written in some shared document, or even worse, on some wiki page. You may all have great wikis. Raise your hand if you have a great wiki. Right? Okay, that's good. Good job, good job. Wikis normally super suck, right? And no one is good at maintaining them. The same, you go, I'm going to search on architectural things, and you find 6 pages. You're like, cool. One of them is right? So the idea is that you put the architectural decisions right in the code base, where, it's like kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? So that really resonated with me, because as a developer with a developer background, I like to go to something new, check out the code, and see what's what, right? So having a place where I can see all the decisions that were made for a particular project, along with the code I've checked out, to me really resonated. So the real question is, who cares, right? Like, why is it important to document this stuff? So for me at least, and I've mentioned this, the important thing is to capture the context around the decisions, right? It's not the decisions themselves, although that's good to know. It's really that context. So when someone is faced with a decision, right, our developers and ourselves are faced with decisions every day, right? So we can do one of two things, right? We could say, I'd like to make a change, and I can either blindly accept the original decision, right? So I can just say, cool, they knew what they were doing, I'm just going to accept that. But the thing is, at this moment, the context may have changed. Something about the way that decision was made might not be relevant anymore, right? Or even worse, they could just change it. Whee! And that might be okay, right? Again, the context may have changed. It might be the right time to change that decision, but not having any understanding of why you made those decisions in the beginning might lead you to make a change that is a bad change, because all of those things are still in play. So I'll talk about real quickly what an ADR looks like. So an ADR is a text document, and it's usually written in Markdown. You create one ADR per file. So the idea is that these things are short and to the point. And usually they're named something like this. So they're numbered. So if you have 26 decisions, you'll have 26 documents. Usually the file name is as descriptive as you can make a file name. And there's not really like limitations necessarily. You don't have to make your file names really short anymore. And then you save them in a folder in your project. So this is an example. There's an ADR folder at the top level. This is a Maven project. So in that, you have these documents, right? So this is an example of what what an ADR looks like. And this is a real thing, by the way. There's some tooling out there that helps you generate ADRs. And you go to my website at the end, you can see a link to this talk. One of the things it does is generate an ADR that says you're going to generate your ADRs in Markdown. So this is the real thing. So the parts of an ADR, right? So there's a title, and it's usually as simple as you can say it. Markdown format, Git for version control, LDAP for authentication, Angular for front-end development, something like that. And there's a status. Right, so the idea is that decisions aren't static, they change over time. In the original proposal, this was something like proposed, accepted, superseded, and deprecated. Right, so you'd have this directory, and among them would be things in various statuses. And the original idea is that these things were immutable. So if you changed a decision, you introduced the second document that changed that decision, you mark this one as deprecated. In practice, we found that was a little cumbersome, right? You're in source control after all. If you want to change something, just change it, and you have a record of it. So we ended up getting rid of superseded and deprecated. If we did deprecate something completely, we'd move it to an archive directory. And again, the point here is adopt these things for how your work style works best. So the context, again, this is, to me, the most important part, right? You describe these things in a factual way, right? There's going to be biases. Everyone has like biases, and you make one decision for another because of biases. So record those things and try to record them in a way that's non-threatening, right? You don't want to make someone feel bad because you chose their decision. So don't be like, ha, your thing sucked. We chose this one instead, right? Try to record them in a factual way. And the other thing is if there's tension, right? Everything has tension, and tension isn't a bad thing, right? Where you have ideas and tension are where you get creativity, right? But record that tension. And then there's the decision itself. Usually it's something like, we will do X. And that's a simple statement of what the decision is. And then the last thing is consequences, for good or ill, right? Every decision is going to have something good about it and maybe something bad about it. Record those things. Again, these are like Liz said, I think, these are cookies to your future self, right? You want to leave these notes to your future self so you can say, why did we do this? Oh, that's why we did it. So again, these are designed to be short documents. And this is one of the things that, like, people don't like documentation because they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to write, books and books and books, right? This is as simple as it can be from a documentation standpoint. So one of the things that we found is we started using ADRs on projects, and it was great. We started documenting things. They're especially awesome with greenfield projects because you can literally record every decision you make from the inception of the product to the end. But that doesn't mean you can't start with a project that's been around for 10 years. Again, all of these things, like the best time to do it is now. Well, the best time to do it was 10 years ago, but if not, then the best time is now. So we found that there's decisions that we're making that were overarching, right? They weren't specific to one project or another. So what we ended up doing was creating a specific Git repo called Technical Architecture, and it contained all of the decisions that we made that applied to all of the teams. Things like, we're going to use Git for version control. We're going to use a particular format for our commits. We're going to use Docker for deployments. So again, anything that sort of spans across multiple projects went there. That repo is also a place where we put things like architectural diagrams for how things fit together. So it was a great place. If someone wanted to know, like, hey, what's up? How does this company work? Like, they could start there as a new developer and see all of the decisions that we made that led them to today. So the nice thing about this is that most people use some sort of pull or merge request workflow, right? And these fit right into that, right? You can propose a new architectural decision by way of a pull request. And you can have robust conversation on that. And if you're using something like GitHub, all of that conversation is recorded. So not only are you recording the context in the final ADR, you're recording the discussions and the context that led to that decision as part of this process. So I think ADRs are awesome. I think everyone should use them. I'm in a new role now at Leslie's Pool Mart. So I'm in the process of introducing these into the company. The other thing I found out is I've kept in touch with my friends at the Container Store, and they've almost taken the A out of architectural decision records. Because if you think about it, this is a great way just to record decisions, right? It doesn't have to be architectural. The genesis of this was architectural decisions, but they can be used to record any kind of decision because all of these same things are useful. So. You don't have to just believe me. I think ThoughtWorks is here. They probably show this, but they do their technology radar. And last year, they said everyone should adopt lightweight architectural decision records. So it's a great technique, and you should do it. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is enterprise architecture guilds. So we've adopted new approaches. We've built cross-functional teams that have two pizzas when they get together. I'm not sure that's... It's an Amazon thing. By the way, what kind of team eats only two pizzas? Isn't the serving size at least half a pizza? So the teams are 4 people? Anyway. So we give these teams free rein to choose whatever technology they want, right? And then enterprise architects are all sad, right? Does anyone here actually have a role of enterprise architect in your company? 0 people. Right, so that's something that's not common anymore necessarily, right? Is even have a discipline around enterprise architecture, right? So that's a role we fill, or it's a role that no one fills in an organization. And I think that's a mistake, right? I think it's important to have somebody with their eye on the ball about how this is happening, and it's probably a lot of us in this room that are doing that. So one approach that we used was based on some work that Spotify had done with their engineering culture. If you haven't read stuff about Spotify, I'm sure you all have, but if you haven't, go read stuff about how Spotify did stuff. And don't copy them, by the way, but be inspired by them. So that's what we did. We were inspired by their concept of guilds, which is just a group of like-minded people that can get together and talk about things. And we kind of took it a step further. The guild was open to all. So we had about 60 developers at the Container Store and about 40 or so people on the ops side. And we opened it up to everyone, right? We let anyone that wanted to participate and that cared about how we were building things, they could come to the meeting, right? Which makes it hard to make decisions. It's really hard in a large group like that to make decisions. So we came up with sort of 3 different ways to make decisions in a group like that. The first one was, and actually you'll see this is a common theme, like the first thing was someone would suggest something new. Then we would say, cool, go write an ADR, right? And they would get together with maybe 3 or 4 like-minded people and produce an ADR and bring it back to the guild. The second thing is we would form short-term special interest groups. So often there's a decision that's complex that might take some time to do. An example of this is when we looked at adopting Docker as our single method for deploying all the things. Like that's complex, right? There's a bunch of problems you need to solve. This is before Kubernetes, so we were doing Docker Swarm, but there's still a bunch of complexities around how you build and deploy Docker things, right? So we set up a short-term SIG. They met every week for probably 6 to 8 weeks. They wrote several ADRs. They built some reference implementations, which I'm going to talk about next, and they proved how we should do Docker things. And there came a point where that was done, right? So it was a short-term SIG. They'd come up with their recommendations, and they dissolved as a SIG. And the last thing that was part of the Architecture Guild was long-running special interest groups. These are things like, in our environment, we had 3 main languages that we used. So we had Java and Spring Boot, generally speaking. We had Ruby and Rails, and we had Node as ways to build things. So each of those had a special interest group around it for things like code standards and linting and like how do you, in the Java world, how in the heck do you keep up with the stuff that's going on now with Java with releases every I don't know what it is, every 3 months or every 6 months. How do you do that, right, as an organization? So we delegated that responsibility to the Java SIG, as an example. So some companies, doesn't sound like many in here, have a thing called an architecture review board. This might be my view as coming from a more enterprise company as opposed to coming from a product or startup. But a lot of companies have architecture review boards. If you want to make a decision, you go before the board and you ask for permission to do a thing. So we essentially gave the responsibility of the architecture review board to the guild. And at the beginning, I was really nervous about this, right? We'd kind of at least had some control over our environment, especially after the Mongo incident. We really tried to be thoughtful about what we allowed into the infrastructure. So I went into this and I sort of retained veto power for any bad decisions where I thought oh no, this is going to be awful. I need to at least make sure that I can make, pick the right path if the guild doesn't. But I never had to do it, right? These are people that, if they're coming to the guild, they care about this stuff, and no bad decisions were made. So all of the decisions, if you wanted to do something I would love that we want to introduce Go as one of our sort of official programming languages, then you would make a case for it and bring it before the guild and probably write some ADRs in support of that thing that you wanted to do. So this started to talk about something I mentioned in the slide earlier. How do you socialize these decisions, right? So now you've got this group of advocates. And we had from 20 to 30 people that would attend these guild meetings, right? So when we came to a decision, especially one that they were part of making the decision, they became the advocates to take that back to their teams and socialize that information, right? That's not insufficient. If you're going to try to socialize anything, you have to come up with a litany of ways that you're going to do that. There's no one way that's going to help socialization. So this was one way we socialized it. We also would publish a newsletter once a month with all of the ADRs that were decided that month to kind of let people know, like, hey, if you hadn't heard, there's this decision that was made. So you have to kind of approach it from multiple different angles to make sure that people know, hey, there's a new way to do database deployments. We're using a brand new method where everything is automated. You should do it that way. So each of these meetings had a set agenda, and so it went like this. So at the beginning of every meeting, there was reports from each special interest groups on work that they have done. That's the short-term and the long-term special interest groups. There was discussion on, has this particular short-term SIG reached its end of life? Do we still need to keep meeting? Is there still more discovery that needs to be done around this topic? And then review and discuss open ADRs. And then we kind of do the gladiator, you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if there was enough thumbs down, we kind of just send it back for more discussion. Usually that meant that there was additional discussion that needed to be had or additional ideas. And the last thing was open discussion, right? It was a forum for letting people talk about things that were on their mind, right? And this is something like everyone thinks about new technologies, everyone thinks about what's coming up next or new ways to work. This was a great venue for allowing that discussion to happen. And again, it was sort of like filter down to the point where a discussion became interesting enough, we would either form a short-term SIG or sort of tell some people, great, you think this is important, go write some ADRs around this topic and present them back to the group, and we'll see about bringing them into our infrastructure. Right. So the last thing is building reference implementations. So the company I work for, Container Store, we set up Docker as our deployment environment. We're using Vault for secret management, Console for service discovery and config management. Our first implementation of this was with Java and Spring Boot. Right, that's an incredibly complex environment. Like, so think about what that means. Like, I'm a new developer and I'm going to go work here. Here's all the things you need to learn in order to work in our environment, right? Each one of those is complex in its own right. So what we decided to do was start building reference implementations that baked in our best practices, right? Like, we spent a lot of time thinking about how Docker should work in our environment and how Docker should work with Vault and how Docker should work with Console. So we had a reference implementation of a Spring Boot app that had all of those things in. It had a Docker file, it had a Gradle build, and it essentially means you could take that and then start building your code without necessarily understanding all these things. Now, you have to be careful too, because you can't treat this stuff like, oh, it's all just magic, and I don't need to understand how this stuff happens. But if you at least give someone a roadmap and show them how it works, it's a lot easier for them to get started than if you give them nothing, right? And it really was a way to enhance developer productivity and to ensure best practices around things like linting rules and static code analysis and security, right? We had all of these things baked into this reference implementation, so you didn't have to worry about how you were going to do observability, because it already had logging and application performance monitoring baked into the base thing you got for free. So it was everything you needed to just start solving the business problem and not worry about futzing with the technical details. So in the real world, it worked, right? We saw this really accelerated. We were at a time then when we were standing up a lot of new microservices. Sorry, we did microservices. We were standing up a lot of new microservices and sort of deconstructing some monoliths, and so setting up a new thing and getting it running was a matter of cloning a Git repo, deleting the .git directory, resubmitting it to a new repo, and running one build. And then you had a thing that was deployed to your test environment or your dev environment. So from a productivity standpoint, imagine what that's like if that's the simplest you need to do to stand up a new application. It was pretty great. And then over time, as I said, we ended up with, we added Ruby and Rails as a second way to build things. And before Docker, all these things had their own unique snowflake deployments, right? It was how you deployed Rails and how you deployed Node and how you deployed Java were three separate processes. So Docker allowed us to deploy those in one way, and with three reference implementations that had the same things baked into them, it allowed us to be sort of productive in any of our approved language stacks. So it's important that you realize that when you do something like this, there's an implicit commitment implementation, like documentation or like anything else you do, is going to get stale unless you put effort into it. The good thing was, for us, we sort of like, it was a lot of these things, and you can probably see this, a lot of these things sort of start to reinforce each other, right? So you'd have the Java reference implementation for Spring Boot was owned by the Java SIG. Let's say we wanted to adopt something new, like a new version of Spring Boot, or maybe we want to switch from console to Zookeeper or something else for service discovery. Like, you do that in the reference implementation first, right? So it also became a playground for trying new things and ensuring that they're going to work with the rest of our environment. So it was very self-reinforcing that it wasn't hard to get people to maintain these applications, because they wanted to maintain them so that they got that stuff for free the next time they built something new, right? So the benefits were really way beyond just all the things I've talked about, right? Again, this is another way you can socialize your best practices and your architectural decisions. Someone wants to know how Vault and how secrets are injected into our Docker containers. You go look at it, right? And as developers, you're much more likely to understand something by going and seeing what the code does than necessarily reading some document about it. So we do have a document about it. We talk about using Vault for secret management. There's an ADR for that. And then you can go look at a reference implementation in Java or Rails or Node that shows how secrets are injected into the application and how the application gets a handle to a secret it needs to log onto a database or to call a web service. So it really helps with that, again, that socialization aspect. It gives people a place to go see how those decisions were realized in code. So I've got about 3 minutes left. So I had this extra slide in here in case I was early. This is an architectural technique that is also good, I think, at building and helping socialize how you're going to build something. It's especially useful when you're starting something from scratch. Has anyone heard of either of these techniques? A few people, right? So the idea is, and I've heard different names for it, I always called it a tracer bullet. It's also been called a steel thread. And essentially what it means is that as you begin to build something, you build the simplest possible thing that exercises all of the components, right? So you're building this, in the steel thread analogy, you're building this thread through the whole thing that becomes the basis for your entire application. So your front end talks to your back end, which talks to your database, or it talks to your web service, whatever the parts of your system are, and it logs to your logging system, and you can see it in your application performance monitoring tools. It's the simplest possible thing that executes all of the paths, right? And think about how that helps with the socialization aspect, right? Each of those things is an architectural decision. Now you've got an implementation that shows how each of those things connect. So socializing it amongst the team, now they can see how they connect, and it's especially useful when you're dealing with a project that has multiple teams involved, right? Each of them can now see how those connections are made and make sure that they all work, so that when you're building things later, I mean, it's like the worst thing ever. Probably no one does this anymore, right? Where like the front end team's over here building the front end, and the back end team's over here building the back end, and they're trying to build that train to the middle, and hopefully they meet, right? Does anyone is that familiar to anyone? Maybe. I know people still do that, right? So this is a way. I mean, if you still have multiple teams doing it, at least you do it as soon as possible, and maybe what's a dumb, unstyled front end talking to a minimal back end that talks to maybe one database table. But again, it gives you that something to build on, and now all the interactions you're building on top of proven ways to talk through these systems. So thanks for your time. So as I said, we are really at a crossroads with how we do development, right? The old ways are changing, and I'm running across this now in my new role, where I've got a ton of legacy systems that I've got to bring up to speed. So these things are very much on the top of my mind. And so I think hopefully these things I've given you are just some additional tools you can put in your toolbox and adopt for the way you use it. So here's the Git repo that has the slides for the talk. You can also get them on my website, imagiantnerd.com. So thanks so much.